Well, it's a darkening sky over an overcast Lound wood just outside the village of Eakring, which you can see just in the distance there where the lights are, just north of Eakring. And I'm just inside the entrance of Lound Wood, and this is the first attempt at trapping since back in February. And more about that later. And it's getting dark enough now, so time to switch the trap on. Well, this is April the 9th today. I nearly forgot then, but it's an awfully long time since I've been able to get out and moth trap, and that's purely down to the weather. We've had a strange spring. The nights have just been, in the majority, too cool to warrant turning out anywhere, and I've not run the trap at home because there's even less point in running a trap this time of year with cool temperatures. You need to wait till it warms a bit before you get a number of moths to your garden traps, and people are reporting very low numbers of moths at such traps, so it pays to come out. But with the combination of the cool or colder nights, the low nighttime temperatures, coupled with clear skies, a full moon, and also when conditions have been favourable and the temperatures have been warm enough or mild enough to warrant coming out, we've had rain. It's really been like that since I last trapped, I think it was the 17th of February, the last moth trapping video on this channel, and that was curtailed by generator failure. Now I've looked at the generator and it's the usual sort of carburetor problems. I might have fixed it, and we'll have to see how we go, but there should be decent numbers of moths tonight. It's cloudy and it's mild. The temperature on the way here was knocking around towards about 11 and 12 centigrade, so hopefully we should do well for moths. So that's the plan. Hopefully the generator will continue to perform as it is doing at the moment, but my confidence in it is somewhat diminished, but we'll see how we go. There should be a better range of moths by now that we're into early April. Should be a number of species such as water carpet will be one. There'll be a number of other new species for the year as well, but the commonest moths probably going to be species like the perennial favourite Diurnia fagella, one of the most commonly requested identifications in history, I think, certainly in the history of social media. So it's a darkening sky. That means time for the first cup of tea. Well, the first moth is in, and the second one actually. This is our favourite and early arrival, and this is a chestnut. I was expecting common Quaker, but it didn't look bright orange enough for chestnut. But I have to remember that by now some moths, having overwintered, are starting to not quite look the best. So a nice early chestnut. The other moth that's come in is a small Quaker. Common and small Quakers, I should imagine, will dominate also the proceedings tonight, and hopefully we'll get something interesting tucked in too. And this is the small Quaker. It doesn't look a great deal, neither do most common Quakers, and this one's showing a little bit of wear as well. But size wise, if I risk disturbing it by putting my really grotty and grubby finger outside of it, you get an idea of the small size. And these are very obvious. It's the only small noctuid that you're going to get flitting around the light, but they typically settle down quite quickly. But rather nondescript, I'm afraid. some can be quite decently coloured and marked and quite variable. The ground colour often is on small quakers, so they're the first arrivals at the light. I don't make lots of notes about the conditions. It's just basically a date, site, the weather conditions, temperature of course at the start and at the end of the trapping session, and of course the time at the start of the session. So another small quaker has just dropped in. This should be a decent night. I just hope that the old generator continues to run. And I still haven't had that cup of tea yet, so we need to get things sorted here. Well, we've got a nice early thorn in. Very characteristic resting position for early thorns, and they all have these various scallops to the edges of both fore and hind wings. Purple thorn is far more contrasting than this, but it's a lovely moth, but you'll never see it with the wings open, early thorn. Nice to get though. We've had a satellite in as well, as the early thorn goes off for a little fly around. There is a satellite, and I'll try and show you that as soon as it's calmed down, but early thorn is new for the year. Well, the generator's struggling at times, but I will persevere. The only problem is if it doesn't or isn't able to produce enough energy to keep the light lit, you have to wait at least about 10 minutes, quarter of an hour for the bulb to cool down before it can be re-fired up. There's another moth just flown into the light on the other side of the light. So it looks like I need to have another look at the generator. But it's a lovely evening, beautiful evening. There was a bit of a breeze early on, and I think if I'd gone on the edge of the wood I would have felt that breeze more, but there's absolutely nothing. I thought that even just being inside the entrance I would have felt some breeze, but there's nothing. And that was like a water carpet that's flitting around at the back, just gone by the car. And the sky is still not properly dark yet. We're at about 8:30, 20:30 hours. So the moths should start to come in now. In fact, there's something there which looks suspiciously chestnut-like in flight. There's two water carpets that have just arrived. One appears to have done a runner, but it's a common geometrid moth of early spring, and it will occur in gardens. I've had it at home, and that's within the middle of a small town. So suburban locations, you should get this moth fairly easily, at least maybe within a couple of years. A nicely marked species, very similar. It can get mixed up with small phoenix, but and there's a dark form of this which I seem to remember only seen once, maybe twice, and that looks decidedly different. So that's water carpet. That's another species that we've got in, and I have had Dionaea flagella fly by, so another couple of species to put down. Now here's a common moth. If you trap in woodland containing oak, you'll certainly get this time of year, and this is a pristine lunar marbled brown. I'd completely forgotten about this species, but it's a moth typical of April, often arrives at light in good numbers. May well just be hatching out now, but we'll see how many more come in. But it really is beautifully marked, this, although it's just various shades of dark grey. It is well marked with those lines going across the forewings, with lots of zigzags in those lines, and then there's two dark crescent shapes just between those that you may well just be able to make out. But a really nice moth, cracking little thing. So this is a lunar marble brown, and it will occur in suburban gardens. This is one species that I've not had at home yet, although it has occurred at someone's trap only a quarter of a mile from my house. But certainly if you're trapping woodland this time of year, you'll almost certainly get this beautiful moth. Well, there's the general scene. The grass is certainly an awful lot longer compared to the middle of February when I last trapped here, or when I last trapped full stop, to be honest. We're still leafless on virtually all of the trees, but you may well be able to see just right of the car, there's a prunus there which is in, well, quite well in leaf. It's a funny year, this, a very funny year. A lot of stuff's late. I think hirundines, like your house martins and swallows, I think they're late at the moment. They'll soon make up. Obviously migration depends on the weather between Africa and Nottinghamshire and elsewhere in the UK. But it'd be interesting to see what moths I do get, or at least what totals of moths. There's a little micro, or that looks like a Dionaea flagella, which is toying with the idea of dropping down to the light, but has thought better of it and gone. But it's nice just to be out. I know there's quite a lot of moth trappers that follow this channel, so I'm sorry for the delay in putting out videos of moth trapping, but hopefully during the summer we can more than make up for the number of moth trapping sessions. Here's one of those dull brown jobs. Unfortunately, this is a brindled pug. Most people avoid pugs like the plague, or at least the identification of pugs, and in many instances quite rightly. But this is one of the easiest to determine based on its flight time, because it flies early in the year, and aside from the odd double striped pug, brindled pug here is the first of the pugs to fly in good numbers. Mottled pug eventually takes over as you get towards the end of April and into May. It's not much to look at, admittedly, is it? But some specimens can be very attractive and very well marked when photographed in decent light. Not like this. However, it's not all dull and boring, but I have a moth here in my hand in a pot, which for me is a real highlight and is far from dull and boring. It's just that it won't settle down, so you're in for a pot shot, unfortunately. Now, not long just in fact it arrived just before I started filming that brindled pug, for which there's now 2 or 3 in. But then I'd potted this up by then, and this for me is a new species. I have seen it before, but Dillis and I didn't catch it, and it's a new species certainly for the Eakring area. And this is a powdered quaker. It's very pale, and unfortunately, as you can see, it won't sit still. I do have good photographs of powdered quaker, and it really is a most attractive moth, but this is the first time that I've trapped one anywhere in my history of moth trapping. It's supposed to be a common species in Nottinghamshire, but I don't think it's taken that regularly. I don't know, someone might have numbers of these dropping in the garden, but unfortunately it's too common to make it into the county recorder's annual report. But I know of one recent record from the Sherwood Forest area. I think it's from Budby South Forest, but in all the times that Dillis and I trapped there, we never had powdered quaker. When you get something like this, it makes the whole effort of loading the car up, getting out here, unloading the car and setting up worthwhile. Excellent. This was another species that I'd not thought about. And I think it's time that I had another walk around the light to see what else has come in and what I might have missed. This is going home, hopefully for some photographs. You'll have to excuse the white dot towards the top right of the screen. It's just a fault or a glare catching the lens. But I was going to do a little chat about the fact that not many moths are coming in, but all of a sudden it's picked up. Mostly brindled pugs, a few, at least a couple more small quakers, and a single common quaker not long just come in, and one or two more water carpets. Water carpet is especially common in flight. It appears slightly yellowish orange or bronze, you could say. It's quite distinctive in flight. It's one of those moths that can sometimes be a little bit awkward to photograph because it has almost like a glossy sheen to it, and I think that's what shows up and makes the moth appear slightly orangey yellowish colour than what it is. But say there's one or two moths in. There's still no breeze. It's very pleasant. The temperature is fairly decent. I've not checked it for half an hour or so, but that was a water carpet that's just flitted up. That looks a bit more interesting. That just went up and came down, but when I just had a check around the light, there was nothing of notable interest. The one that we have got of notable interest is safely in a pot on the dashboard of the car. And the generator's still going. At times you think it's going to pack up, but it keeps trundling along. And what has surprised me is the lack of Diurnia fagella. Only the male can fly. The female has vestigial wings, certainly can't fly. It can be found on the trunks of trees during the daylight, but the male usually occurs in good numbers, but perhaps it's just a little bit still too early. As I say, it's a funny year. We've had the last few days had some nice daytime temperatures, some lovely sunny weather. Today it was a bit more cloudy. Temperatures up towards the mid-teens, feeling nice and pleasantly warm. But then on the night time, clear skies, and the temperature just drops like a stone. So we'll see what the next hour brings. Well, activity continues to steadily increase. The moths that are mainly coming in now, in this last sort of 10 minutes, are the quakers. Small quakers have stopped a bit, and it's common quakers that have taken over. No clouded drab as yet. Those moths that are coming in, say like the quakers, they're moths that feed, so they don't always drop in at light very quickly. Sometimes if one happens to have roosted during the day near to where you trap, you can catch one pretty soon, but as a majority they'll drop in slightly later once they've fed, or once they've mated, of course. Now here's a cracker of a moth. This is purple thorn. You saw early thorn earlier in the video, and I mentioned that purple thorn was more contrasty, and it is a more beautiful moth. And just look at that russet colour, very reminiscent of the colour of a herald moth, or the predominant colour of the forewings of a herald moth. It's an absolute beauty, isn't it? Like early thorn, purple thorn has 2 broods a year, so you'll get these adults flying now in sort of April and May, and then later in the summer a smaller second brood appears. But it's an absolute stonker, isn't it? It's a cracking species, and I do love purple thorns. I like thorns in general. There's nothing else really has the stance and shape and jizz of a thorn. But unlike early thorn, purple thorn, as you can see, when at rest, it does hold the wings open slightly. If I just tilt it like that, it varies between thorns. The small moth at the side is Eakring subpurpurella, which has wanted a cameo appearance, but the star of this clip has to be this purple thorn. It's a beautiful thing. Well, there's more moths of the same species starting to, or continuing to, come into the light. Mostly brindled pug, common quaker, small quakers, and there's still the odd water carpet coming in. It'd be nice if there's one more unexpected species. And the generator is just about running okay. It has its moments where it goes to try and cut out, but it's kept going. And we've got a decent catch of moths. The weather for the rest of this coming week isn't suitable for moth trapping at all, so it's either tonight or at least another week's wait. And I've missed moth trapping, I must admit. Sometimes on a cool spring evening it's difficult to raise that enthusiasm when you're sat in a nice warm home. But I'm certainly glad that I've come out. Powdered quaker is obviously the highlight for me, and I did tell quite a little lie early on, because I have had powdered quaker, but it was in larval form. Last year I found it fairly close by on an old former pit top site at Ollerton Pit Woods. Unfortunately it didn't make it through to pupal stage, but that was my only encounter with the species until tonight. We're just coming up to 10 o'clock. I may well give it another quarter of an hour, and that'll make it 2 hours. It's the kind of thing that, or kind of practice that Dylan and I used to do regularly. We'd say about a quarter of an hour before packing up, we'll just give it another quarter of an hour. We'll have another cup of tea and a cigarette, and then we'll go, see if nothing else comes in. Quite often something else would drop in and we'd end up staying for another hour or so. It's quite interesting as the first clouded drab of the night eventually decides to roll in. But that's not too unusual. Clouded drabs can sometimes be quite slow in coming into light. So that's another species to add to the list. We've done well tonight. I'm quite happy. Happy more so that the generators managed to get through a nearly 2 hour session, and what will probably turn out to be a 2 hour session. There's a slight breeze just starting to pick up occasionally, but decent numbers of moths. It's been a good session. Maybe there might well be one more little surprise somewhere up there. Well, nothing really interesting has come in. Not since that last clip. You may well be able to hear the slight breeze which is developing, just going over the camera's microphone. Rain's forecast after midnight. Just glad that I managed to get a session in. Do love moth trapping. I know it's lonely and unsociable, but it's one of the things you have to put up with, or at least go out with somebody else and trap. Either way, it's enjoyable. And it'll be nice once the weather continues to warm up and the number of moths increases to have the odd trapping session at home again. Been a big difference though between the species from 2 months ago. The last time I was here on February the 17th, if memory serves me well enough, and we were getting species like pale brindle beauty and spring usher and other early species. Dotted border was another one. I'm just starting to reach the peak, and if it hadn't been for the trouble with generator, I may well have got another trapping session in late February, maybe early March, but then the weather took hold and caused the problems. But it's been nice to get back out. Five more minutes then, which was another thing Dillis and I always used to say after we'd had a quarter of an hour.